Saint-Estèphe is the farthest north of the major appellations in the Medoc. It's located past Pauillac. It's the coolest of the major appellations, and it's generally the last to harvest. There tends to be a higher percentage of clay in the soils, and so there's a larger amount of Merlot planted in Saint-Estèphe than in appellations such as Pauillac. It's worth keeping in mind that clay soils tend to retain water a little bit better than gravelly soils, and so the wine producers in Saint-Estèphe typically fare well in very warm vintages, and so you can have some extremely strong wines in vintages like 2003 and 2009. Saint-Estèphe has two producers that are classified as second growths in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, Costas-Tournelle and Montrose. Montrose is definitely the youngest producer in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux. In fact, the first vintage for Montrose is 1815, so it was only around for about 40 vintages at the time of the 1855 classification. Montrose gets its name from the fact that when heather was in bloom, the hillsides in the area turned pink, and so sailors referred to it as Montrose. Interestingly, the current owners of Montrose purchased it because they were so impressed with the 1989 vintage that they said that if they ever got the opportunity to purchase this producer, they would do so. They finally got their chance in 2006. Immediately after acquiring Montrose, they embarked on an ambitious renovation program and spent a whopping 55 million euros investing it in the winemaking facilities and modernizing and overhauling all aspects of this estate. The results were extremely impressive, and they absolutely have a state-of-the-art winemaking facility and definitely one of the most impressive barrel rooms that I saw when I was in Bordeaux. Among other things, they purchased 59 stainless steel tanks that have temperature control that they use for plot-by-plot vinification. Montrose does malolactic fermentation in the stainless steel tanks and does frequent pump-overs, much more in the way of pump-over than some other producers, and so the wines tend to be a bit more extracted than some of their competitors. Montrose generally matures the top wine in 60% new French oak for around 18 months or so. Montrose has 95 hectares of vines that are planted to 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, 32% Merlot, 6% Cabernet Franc, and 2% Petit Verdot. These vines average around 40 years of age, but they are undergoing a replanting program, and they're increasing the percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon. So these percentages will change a little bit, and also the average age of the vines will come down a little bit as some of these newer vines come online. Most of the Montrose vineyards are farmed organically, and their goal is to become 100% organic in the near future. Montrose uses a very strict selection of fruit for the top wine, so only about 35 to 40% of the harvest makes it into the top wine. Beginning with the 2023 vintage, for example, they're only going to use the fruit from Terrace 4, which is largely the vineyard that's right next to the chateau and closest to the Gironde River, in their top wine. Château Montrose is definitely an extremely age-worthy wine. Among other things, that means that it can be a challenge to drink it when it's young. For example, when I visited the winery, I tasted the 2017 vintage. While this vintage is certainly very promising and a high-quality wine, it's definitely one that's going to need another decade or so of aging before it shows its best. But on the bright side, this extreme age-worthiness also means that if you can find back vintages of Montrose with good provenance, you may want to take a flyer on them, and there's a good chance that they'll still be very enjoyable. Some of my favorite vintages of Montrose include 1989, 1990, 1996, 2000, 2003, and 2009 and 10. And certainly after the renovations to the winery were completed, the vintages from 2014 to the present are all quite strong. And in fact, during that era, the Montrose wines are almost at the same quality level as Costas-Tournelle. If you're wondering about a comparison between Montrose and Costas-Tournelle, I tend to find Costas-Tournelle to be a little bit more ripe and also to include some flavors and aromas of exotic spices, whereas Montrose can be a little bit more powerful, dense, and structured. Montrose also has a second wine that's called Madame de Montrose, They'll typically use about 40 to 45% of the harvest for this second wine. Oftentimes, they will mature this wine in 30% new French oak for about 12 months before it's bottled. This wine often consists of around 70% Merlot and 25% Cabernet Sauvignon, and they also include some Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc. In 2022, this wine was extremely highly acclaimed, yet sells for only around $45 per bottle. So it's definitely a very compelling value. While the second wine also benefits from some additional aging after release, it doesn't require nearly as much aging as the top wine. The 2017 I enjoyed at the winery was definitely quite enjoyable, even though there's still no rush to drink that one. That portion of the harvest that does not make it into the top wine or the second wine is either sold off, or in some vintages they make a third wine that's sold primarily to restaurants. If you enjoyed this video, I've published dozens of other videos about Bordeaux. If you'd like to learn more, please be sure to check out the playlist that's linked above.